this week will be on deltas and floodplains of Africa, which most of you have great knowledge of. And the interesting thing about deltas is that they have they have two main characteristics. One is that they are a mosaic of several ecosystems. You have floodplains, mangroves, you have oxbow lakes, or just different types of lakes. They have riverine forests, and they support a very, very rich biodiversity as well. This biodiversity and rich ecosystems also support the high productivity and sustain a wide range of traditional activities, the socio-economic activities of many communities that support not just their livelihood, but their social heritage. In an example, for example, in the Tana Delta, where Ken Webb has been working for many years, we have activities such as recession agriculture that are sustained by this ecosystem. The Kupokomo is one tribe that carries out these activities. We have forest use and woody and non-woody products, which are also used by the Pokomo people, but the Wata were the endemic tribe of that area. We also have fisheries. Fisheries are supported for many communities, including the Luo, who are migrants, the Pokomo, the Orma, and also the Wata. And then you have the livestock. When you go to most deltas, such as the Tana, you have thousands, tens of thousands of livestock that come there during the dry season to take advantage of it. And in this case, we find mostly the Orma, the Wata, and the Somali. The flood is the system that is the engine of the system. The flood itself is the engine of the system. The floods control the ecosystem services. And what we find is, without them, we would not be able to have the provisioning services that we've talked about that support food production, agriculture, and fisheries. We wouldn't be able to have the palm and timber and production. Neither would we be able to have any water, fresh and groundwater that we can use. So the flood is actually the engine. And for this week, we will have the opportunity to visit the Rufiji and also have a description of how recession agriculture, also known as Masao in this Rufiji system, is supported by the flood itself in the various sections. So you can anticipate that at the end of this week, when we go to the Rufiji for this trip, you'll be able to actually see how the flood is the engine for recession agriculture in these places.
60 presentations altogether, oral and poster. And one of the first objectives of this conference is to really learn from each other, but also try to draw generic research questions. Because we think we know a lot about floodplains and deltas, but actually, even though we have all seen that the flood is the engine of the ecosystem, as Wanja has mentioned, there's a lot of questions that are unanswered. The first one, for example, is what is exactly the link between flood and fisheries? A second one is how does groundwater recharge benefit the riverine forest? We don't know exactly. We know forests are there because of the groundwater, but how does that work? And other research question, for example, that we have not really been really well defined is how does the floodplain transform and stock the carbon? And we will have one whole session this afternoon on this question. There are also, for example, other questions that we are going to discuss on day 2. What is the effect of labeling a delta or a protected area, a biosphere reserve or a Ramsar site? We don't know as well how do formal and customary rules combine each other and shape the natural resource governance. And for example, what are the farmers' adaptation strategy to seasonal and long-term changes? So during these 3 days, we will have several sessions trying to answer those kind of large questions by case studies. Also, there's a lot of unknown in the dominant paradigm. So it's difficult for us to to really answer those questions with theory. For example, in the dominant paradigm of resilience, the resilience concept, which is a long-term capacity of a system to deal with change and continue to develop and adapt, we actually don't really know how floodplains and delta can cope with flood pattern changes, which is going to be the focus of our session 1. How do floodplain and delta deals with climate change? And we don't know what are the scenarios for the future. There's another dominant paradigm, which is ecosystem services. It's a word we found in more than 50% of the abstract, but we actually know very little about the interaction between ecosystem functioning and ecosystem services. For example, the link between the floods and ecosystem services is still to be defined. We know very little about the link between ecosystem services and human well-being. And we don't know who is benefiting and who is losing. So the day 2 is going to be really focused on this kind of question and trying to define the interaction. Also, why now a conference on floodplain and deltas? It's really an important time. A lot of new large dams are going to be built. There was a pause in the construction of dams after 2000 and the guideline of the World Commission of Dams. But after 15 years, there's a new hydropower is back on the agenda with new donors, new tools, and new issues as well. So it's really a good time for us to join together and try to think of the various examples. Another reason is in floodplain and deltas, it's really a global trend, but there's a lot of large-scale land acquisition, and especially in Africa. I don't know if you see very well this little graph, but the bigger circle here is showing that large-scale land acquisition are happening in Africa. And this has started, this is the first graph, it has started since 2009. And those figures are from this report, Land Rights and the Rush for Land, which was prepared by EED, CIRAD, and the International Land Coalition. Another reason why to do a conference like this today is in all countries of Africa, there's really a lot happening on their protection through different labels, Ramsar, UNESCO, Biosphere Reserve, or Protected Area. So there's really an area for studying here.
Okay. Another objective of this conference that we think is very important is how we share the lessons learned from various research that we do with decision makers and the rest of the community. As we all are aware that once one has done a research, it's very important that you are communicating it back, otherwise it's not important. So from here we will have the scientists here connecting to the local communities, and then it's also the necessity that we connect also to the decision makers. And from our example in Rufiji, the Geopower project, we had, there are people, Stéphanie was part of the project, when they devised a mechanism of sharing the results with local community there, where you have the participatory mapping, and then when you have the local communities being part of the data collection and things, but also we have various feedback workshops. And with that purpose also for this conference, we were also thinking it's also important to share some of the findings we get or we share from this conference with the decision makers. as a beginning of how to transfer the knowledge from the research to the decision makers. And as we are all aware that there are a number of studies that have been conducted everywhere in the world, but then we lack these long-term studies and data to improve the quality of impact assessment. For example, for this chart here, there were some data which was existing, and then all of a sudden you find that in 1984 there is no more data that is existing. So we see it's important to have a long-term data or database that can help in having a clear impact assessment. Otherwise, in most cases, we have just very short data, maybe 3-week study, which is not helpful. So also we need the communication with the decision makers to share the results. And for that purpose, we have built, just to start, the decision makers wrap-up session on the last day of this conference, whereby we are bringing the Tanzanian decision makers, because we could not bring all the decision makers from the countries participating in this conference, but just for the representation, and because Tanzania is hosting this conference, then the organizing team felt that is also very good. We get the results from this conference shared with the decision makers of Tanzania for the lessons learned, but also these ones will be shared in the wide range but through other channels that is possible. And it's also a wish of the organizing committee that after this, at the end of this conference, we can divide or we can discuss on what is next, like how do we continue from here and the future conference on African deltas and floodplains, as it has been realized that it's an important area of ecosystem, an important ecosystem that is lacking research or is lacking a lot of data.